music podcast for kids.
Al Pitrelli is an American guitarist best known for his work with the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, Megadeth, Alice Cooper, and many others. Pitrelli has been a core member of the Trans-Siberian Orchestra since their first album. As well as being the main lead guitarist, he is also the live musical director. TSO's 2007 tour program credits his edgy playing and vast musical lexicon, with making him a perfect fit for the band's constant, boundary-pushing progressive rock styles. Pitrelli's leads are notable on Tracers and the instrumental Toccata Carpimus Noctem, the latter being the piece he co-wrote. Both songs form part of the group's fifth rock opera on their 2009 album Night Castle. A fabulous way to celebrate the holiday season is with a live stream and unique performance of Christmas Eve and Other Stories from the Trans-Siberian Orchestra on December 18, 2020. Visit tsolivestream.com for more info. Al Pitrelli, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. How you guys doing?
Very good. Very good. So we always like to start out asking our guests about their background with music education as a child. What musical experiences did you have as a child in the school setting and even outside of school?
Well, anybody from my generation, I'm 58 years old. So anybody you talk to who's close to my age probably will say the same thing. The Beatles on Ed and Sullivan in 1964.
Yeah.
You know, I was 2 years old in my feety pajamas and literally was watching the TV, stopped me in my tracks. And as a matter of fact, this guitar, which is like 1930, was my granddaddy's.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
In the corner next to the fireplace, and that's where I keep it in my home now after all these years. Kind of like, commemorative, excuse me.
Yeah.
And I remember watching them, and it grabbed me from right in the center of my chest and my heart and my soul and never let go. Much to my parents' chagrin, mind you. That was a big thing in the 1960s. Those four lads from Liverpool did not look right on TV. And I thought, anyway, so, at 2 years old, it is what it is. And I have like a little itty bitty guitar, and I just kind of strum and drag around, whatever. And my parents thought it was kind of cute. Mm-hmm. So they got me guitar lessons at about 5 years old, maybe 6 years old, like the local guy in town. Open up Mel Bay's Book One, learning how to read. That's all we had back then.
Yep. Yeah.
And it was just, I loved it. I just wanted to be the Beatles. I just wanted to be like John Lennon and Paul McCartney, George Ringo, whatever. That was it. But then a little bit older, going through the public school system in New York, in the third grade, everybody got an instrument. So they handed me a trumpet.
Okay.
So I was in the wind ensemble, the orchestra, the marching band, you name it, Nice. And what I didn't realize, I didn't think the trumpet was nearly as cool as the guitar, but, you just did it, and then that's what you did. I was too small to play football, so it was much safer with the bugle. But unbeknownst to me at the time, I was learning how to read really, really well. Mm-hmm. I was getting a great education in the works by the great composers. I was understanding how orchestral music worked, how the instruments worked, the difference between the different brass instruments, woodwinds, the strings, percussion, all that stuff. And I was kind of like rolling my eyes back then because, I wanted to be I wanted to be a Beatle. Or now, by 1970, with the advent of like Zeppelin and Cream and all these bands, it's like, I'm in, But in retrospect, it was probably one of the most important things ever to be part of the public school system in the music departments, because it was basically getting me ready for this job that I had no idea, that I didn't see on the horizon, that was going to be all-encompassing as a musician. Yeah. Not only as a player, being a musical director, I had to have kind of a deep knowledge of all instruments and understanding scores and instrumentation and voicings and all that. And I didn't realize that I knew a lot of it already from just going to school,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the Beatles and some other bands. Your inspirations growing up, how broad were your inspirations in terms of styles and artists, maybe in your high school years?
Yeah, it was pretty broad because, again, going back to that era, there was only AM radio in the 60s. Okay, so on WABC AM, it was only top 40 radio, and at that point, it was like whatever was being played, we listened to. So you had the Beatles, the Beach Boys, let's say the Stones. Motown was huge. Okay, you had show tunes, anything like West Side Story, South Pacific, whatever, musicals that were popular. Well, those songs were played on the radio also. Barbra Streisand, Frank Sinatra, everything that was being played, I just listened to. Because the only two genres of music that I was aware of and still am aware of is good music and bad music.
Nice.
Everything else, whatever. But now in the 70s, with the advent of AOR radio, that was a whole different thing. Now we were being introduced to bands that weren't playing quote unquote top 40 3-minute pop songs. And I love, like I said, my wife and I last night we watched a documentary on like Gladys Knight and the Four Tops and all, Barry Gordy, the whole Motown thing. That's the soundtrack to my childhood. Right. But when you click the radio to FM and all of a sudden you were listening to Chicago's Transit Authority, you listen to Blood, Sweat, and Tear. The first time I heard the Allman Brothers stop me dead in the tracks.
Yeah.
And then we started exploring like when jazz was crossing over into rock, and you had the days of like the early fusion pioneers. When you had Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock after he left Miles Davis's band, Al Di Meola, John McLaughlin. It was just like, this is getting crazy. Yes, ELP, Pink Floyd. So the early 70s was like the Wild West on radio, and I fell in love with all of it.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's neat. And so you were mentioning like in high school, you were playing the trumpet and band and all of that. And then did you go to school for music after that, or how did that in college or?
Yeah, I kind of did. Well, either you do or you didn't. So yes, the answer would be yes, I did. But I didn't enjoy it as much. I went to Nassau Community College on Long Island. And it was kind of like one of those non-committal things. Like community college meant that I woke up at my mother's house, drove to school, fell asleep in the parking lot half the time. Because I was playing in bar bands and staying up like late at night. Like the club scene in New York back then was on a different level. So I didn't really benefit too much from it, but I had been studying privately with a bunch of different guitar players back then, and I ended up being a music nerd. Like I fell in love with the mathematics of music, the theories, all the concepts behind it. So I did a lot of homework on my own, even going back to like late junior high, right through high school. There was some really great theory teachers, ear training, sight singing, solfege, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Which I didn't realize that it was going to be that important, but I knew I just didn't do it. It was either geometry or sight singing. I was going to go with sight singing.
Right.
But I did end up, I got a little tired of kicking around the bars. It felt like a dead-end scene for a while. So I went to Berklee College of Music up in Boston, and I ended up staying there for about 2.5 semesters. And I wasn't thrilled with the curriculum because I knew most of this stuff already. Right. But what I fell in love with was the fact that I kind of gravitated towards a place where musicians from all over the world also ended up. So, back then, it's about 1982, I think, I met a couple people in particular, a keyboard player buddy of mine, Derek Sherinian, who ended up going on. He played with me with Alice Cooper. He was in the band Dream Theater. So I had incredible. Yeah. The our little college band was a dude named Will Calhoun, who started the band Living Color. Wow. So you're talking about, Derek came from Santa Cruz, California. I came from Long Island. Will grew up in the Bronx. There was a Japanese guitar player all the way from Tokyo. So you talk about people from literally all over the planet.
Sure.
And now we're all exchanging ideas. Like this one would be talking about Billy Cobham's Spectrum. I'd be talking about the Leonard Skinner live album. Somebody would be working on Jan Hammer pieces. It was like just as global as the student body was, as was the music. I think one of the Marsalis kids, like the trombone player, I forgot his name, but the younger brother, he was in our as well. So everywhere you look, man, it was just incredibly talented players. And that really caused me to up my game, because now I'm not just a hot shot in my little hometown on Long Island. Mm-hmm. Now, I think 1,200 guitar players enrolled in the first semester up at Berklee that year.
Oh, wow.
By the second semester, I think it was down to 200 were left. Everybody else just said, I'm out here.
Yeah.
So I was like, this competition, this competitive environment, this is really, really enjoyable, and I'm really having a great time. And getting better and realizing how bad I really was simultaneously.
Wow. Now, you've been in a number of pretty famous bands. You mentioned Alice Cooper. And so what are some of those bands, and maybe what are some of the highlights of your career so far? I bet there's a bunch, but give us a few highlights.
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, playing guitar for a living is the highlight, not only of my career, but probably, a big highlight of my life, because I dreamed about this since I was a baby.
Yeah.
And given the opportunity to put a Les Paul around my neck and not only perform, but be involved in, in the creation of music and the performance of music. Again, being a musical director for about 30 years now, to kind of organize stuff, come up with the arrangements, to rehearse a band, to really tighten it up, to represent the artist that I'm working for, albeit Alice or with the Trans-Siberian Orchestra or everybody in between. My job is always take their music and make sure it's represented to the best possible standard. So that's always been a challenge, and I've always enjoyed, rising to that challenge. I mean, listen, on personal notes, like I remember the first time I played with Cooper in London at Wembley Arena, and I looked out in the audience and Jimmy Page was in the front row.
Oh, man.
And so I'm looking down at Jimmy Page, looking back up at me standing next to Alice Cooper. It's like, this is the coolest thing ever.
Yeah. That's amazing.
With the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, I mean, Joe Walsh sat in with us one night. And I remember, like as a kid, learning all the early James Gang music, So, me and my buddy, we'd be learning like Funk 49, Walk Away, whatever, Joe Walsh, Rocky Mountain Way, all that stuff. And then now I'm sitting in my dressing room with Joe Walsh, teaching him my guitar parts because he's going to play one of our songs. Whoa. And I couldn't, be ear to ear grinning. And he's like, what's so funny? And I'm like, dude, 45 years ago, I was trying to figure out the guitar solo of Funk 49. And here I am teaching you one of my parts.
Right.
And he goes, that's how it works,
Yeah.
My got me tickets about 4 years ago to go see Greg Allman. And we got to meet backstage. And I told him what a huge influence he'd been on me my entire life. And he said that he loved the work that I'd done.
Wow.
So to hear that from my biggest idol, these are the musical highlights that I just kind of look back and go, it's worth the amount of work you put in to get somewhere just for those moments.
Right.
Money. That's got to feel good.
Say again?
That's got to feel good.
Well, it does, like money and possessions and material things, they come and they go. It is what it is. Right. But, the moments that I've shared with some of my heroes, like to be on stage with Paul Rogers, and to become friends with him. I have downstairs in like my little guitar room, I got a letter that was written by Gary Rossington a couple of years ago, just saying what a huge fan of mine he was, whereas I grew up listening to Leonard Skinner, since I'm like 12 years old. So to kind of get that pat on the back from that generation and the men and the women that I looked up to and held in such high regard. I just would listen to their records literally 12, 13, 14 hours a day. And just, to one day for them to turn around and say, well, they enjoy what I do now. Those are the things that I will take with me professionally for the rest of my life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. Cool.
And it makes the work good because, to put 10,000 hours into something to be good at, with no guarantee that you're ever going to accomplish anything, and all you're doing is you're self-motivating and being self-disciplined to say, I just want this because I love it so much. Whether I can ever make a living or not, I don't know. But I got to try. I got to work as hard as I can to be as good as I can possibly be. And then when you finally start to realize some of the accolades, and again, like the ones I talked about, the money and the other things don't really matter as much as, again, for somebody like a Steve Vai to look at me and go, dude, you're killing it.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's I'm okay with that,
Yeah. So I'd like to switch the focus onto like the project you're doing now. So we've talked about the orchestra on the Music Podcast for Kids. Mm-hmm. So you're the live music director for the Trans-Siberian Orchestra. So we're curious how the name was chosen and how does it compare to like a symphony orchestra that we've discussed on the show?
Okay, so the first question is, how was it named? And I've answered the question about 1,000 times over the last 25 years. I don't know.
That works.
Good answer.
Paul O'Neill is the gentleman who founded the organization, and he had called me back in the early winter of 1995 to work on this record he was producing. And I was pretty much being a session guitar player in New York City at the time. He didn't want a session player, so he was auditioning all these amazing guitar players and just wasn't getting exactly what he needed, the right part the right, like, extra touch of color for the songs that he had put together. Anyway, he called me up. He put the faders up on this song. And I remember, like when your dog looks at you and tilts its head because it's not really sure what you're saying. That's how I looked at Paul. And I'm like, dude, what's with the Christmas song? And he kind of laughed. He said, well, it's not really a Christmas song. It's more of a soundtrack depicting events that took place on Christmas Eve in the middle of the Sarajevo conflict in the Bosnian War. I said, stop. I was Alice's musical director in 1990. I played in Zagreb and Belgrade. I know the town square that you're depicting in your song. Just press record. And I started playing the first couple notes of what's become Christmas Eve 1224 Sarajevo. Yeah. And he goes, that's exactly what I was looking for. Anyway, you fast forward the end of 95, somehow it ended up at radio, and it became the '1 requested song in America in about 30 seconds that year. Wow. Okay. Every radio station in America played it. It exploded. Yeah. And I thought that was it. I was like, all right, cool. I got to play guitar on this like crazy metal Christmas song,
Right.
Awesome. I was happy that was it. We're good.
Yeah.
Not with Paul O'Neill and this. So he said, I got an idea. I want to write a record around this whole thing. And I'm going to call it Ready. And I said, yeah. He goes, I'm going to call it the Trans-Siberian Orchestra. And I'm like, mind you, the Trans-Siberian Railroad kind of, goes from one portion of the continent to the other. When we would fly from London to Tokyo, you go over all of Asia, and that whole continent. It's just vast. Wow. And he thought, that it just sounded like it was going to connect cultures and demographics and ages and all. And to be honest with you, it's like when Jimmy Page and Robert Plant said we're going to call the band Led Zeppelin. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
It becomes its own thing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, Paul tried to explain to me the detailed story about the naming of it. I was just happy that he called it something, and I was happy to do one record. That was 15 million records ago and 25 years ago.
Yeah.
So, in answer to your second question, how does it relate? It does in the respect that we do record and perform with a full orchestra and a full, multi-timbral choir. Mm-hmm. All right. So there is everything, every instrumentation-wise, it is all represented. And we've incorporated themes from the great composers into some of the work that Paul put together. Obviously, some traditional Christmas themes, church themes as well, like Carol the Bell, I Rest You Merry Gentlemen is the song to put us on the map.
Right.
Along with Paul's genius is kind of like putting it together and then putting a really heavy, darker twist on it again, because it is a dark story with what that song originally represented. Now it's become synonymous with, that.
Right.
Christmas time, Santa's all sorts of cool now,
Yeah, right.
But, and again, going back to the front of our conversation when I was a kid, I didn't realize that, reading scores was going to help out later on in life, or being able to, sight transpose. Because I remember the second song Paul put up was Mozart's 24th and 25th Symphony. Mm-hmm. He wanted me to play guitar on it. And I'm listening, so I was like, all right, hang on, breaks. I said, you got the score? And he's like, you can read? I'm like, yeah, why? Can anybody? I've been reading, I read music before I read the King's English. So I was like, I, open the score. It's like, okay, oboe, clarinet, that sounds like a guitar part. And I'm playing. It's like, oh, dude, it's in the wrong key. They change keys when they record it. He's like, oh, is that a problem? I said, no, hang on. And I sight transposed it on the fly for him.
Yeah.
It's like, you're my guy.
Yeah.
Nice.
And I think that, so if you think about everything we talked about so far, completely from across the board diversity, listening to music growing up because of what I was exposed to radio-wise, and being part of the public school system and being thrown into the wind ensembles and the orchestras and the choirs and all that stuff. This was part of my DNA. Right. So it wasn't stretched me. I didn't know, 50 years ago that I'm going to be sitting in the control room, in front of a huge SSL board playing like a Beethoven or Tchaikovsky or a Grieg piece. I just knew that, all right, I'm going to sit down with the guitar, but I could read and interpret the horn parts, the string parts, the woodwind parts, and do it fairly authentically because I've been so ensconced in that my whole childhood.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
That's awesome.
That's great. So a little more on this piece, the Christmas Eve Sarajevo 1224. So you mentioned a little bit of the history. Can you give us a little more detail about the history of the song? And then the second part of this would be the two melodies. they work really well together. So maybe the history of the song, and then kind of maybe transition into those two melodies and how they work so well.
I'm going to show you. Always keep an acoustic guitar close back.
That's right.
Okay. So again, when I went into the studio, Paul knew that I was fairly well educated. He knew that I understood a lot of different styles of music. To what extent, I don't know if he knew. To be honest with you, I wasn't sure that I knew how well versed I was because I'd never used any of these things before, well, not to this level anyway. So as Paul was telling me the story, the history behind the song is, and this is historically accurate, is that back in whenever the war was, there was a classical cellist who would take his cello down to the town square and play, Bach pieces, Beethoven, Chopin, whatever it was, in protest of these bombing raids.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And like I had said, I was in that town square. Okay. So as soon as Paul started telling me that, I just started going, and he heard that, and he started whistling. And I kind of looked, I was like, that's kind of awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's just how it came out. And then the band kicked it on. I came up with this ostinato. And there was Carol and the Bells. And then, he had the track together. He had his melodies in place, but there was something about like the ideas, the ostinatos, the themes, the motifs that I was trying to put in that represented his characters. Again, like you guys had said earlier, musicals back in the day, Rodgers and Hammerstein, any of those great composers from that. I mean, they were scoring film. Yeah. So that was always part of it. When I would listen to Andrew Lloyd Webber, they were great songs in Jesus Christ Superstar, but it was a score. It had a purpose to it. The first time I heard, and there's something, from Jesus Christ Superstar.
Yeah, right.
That riff was very militant, in tonality. The fact that it was like a D Phrygian almost tonality. God, I sound like such a nerd, don't I?
It's awesome. Do it.
Yeah. So, but there's a reason why certain keys, certain modes, certain scales, certain tonalities fit in there's a certain darkness to it. Just like when there's a Lydian mode being performed, it's a very uplifting, that John Williams used all the time in Star Wars. So again, paying attention to music all my life, I wanted to mathematically figure out why that was what it was. And then once I could put a mathematical equation to it, then I could at least incorporate it into my little toolbox. So again, not knowing what I was preparing for, but when Paul would ask me to come up with a very mysterious question mark-esque line, I'm like, okay, immediately getting into a Lydian tonality, That's on the musical level where we just bonded. I understood what he wanted. He knew that, I could give him not only one idea, but probably 10 different ideas in context of what he was looking for. Right. So, but he had a knack, dude. He just had this incredible knack for not getting too over the listener's head. There's a lot of people who have done a similar type of thing, incorporating classical themes in rock. And it's so deep and it's just so over the top that the average person, like somebody like me is like, okay, I don't get it.
Right.
I don't need to music all night in 7 or 5.
Right. Yeah.
I appreciate it. It's got a certain thing to it and it works. But, I just want to go like this. Again, during Motown, it's got to swing a little bit. I got
that's right.
Aura.
Yeah.
So there's a very fine balance between the mathematics and the theories and the actual practicality of just good music. And that's the thing. Paul had one of many things, but he had that down.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. And the form of Christmas Eve, Sarajevo, it's fascinating. It seems to just float back and forth between like a lullaby and then a driving to like this like passionate musical storm, right? It's just... So could you tell us more about the contrast in the piece and how it's reflected in the instrumentation?
Well, the first, the dichotomy, one of the main ones is the dichotomy between a rock band and an orchestra, almost like the good and evil, if you will, this kind of back and forth. Paul loved the whole concept of an ebb and flow, dynamically. He used to tell me, if you jump into, high performance sports car, whatever it is, a Corvette, a Lamborghini, it doesn't matter. And you jump on it and you get the wheels off the ground and you're doing 200 miles an hour. It's like, this is awesome. And after about 5 minutes, you're like, this is boring. There's no dynamic change.
Right.
So with that piece of music, he knew he wanted to make a statement, because in the midst of this bombing rate, there was lulls, in the devastation. So like a great soundtrack composer, like you guys, everybody, you close your eyes, you draw your own conclusion of what it looked like, what it smelled like. As soon as he put the faders up, I knew exactly what he meant, because if you've ever been in a situation like that, it's not a constant barrage. There's the melancholy, the starlit night. The smoke was kind of settling from the previous onslaught of bombs. And here's this cellist playing, the theme from God Rest You Merry Gentlemen. And all of a sudden, over the hill, here comes the next wave of bombers. Yeah. And that's... no mistake that that's something bad's happening.
Right.
And it kind of, brings you back down dynamically to where, okay, maybe the smoke cleared for a second. What can you see through the smoke through the horizon from this cellist vantage point, where he's watching his countrymen killed and his city decimated. So that's what I found fascinating about the track. And when he explained it to me, I was like, all right, cool. Now let me play my instrument with that angst in mind. It wasn't a really happy moment musically, so I have to, my responsibility is to bring that part, my voice, to life. As far as the instrumentation goes, we've always tried to stay pretty true to when we're using themes from the great composers to pay respects and stay true to that.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I mean, because that's always dangerous. But again, Paul O'Neill was so well versed in the classics that when we toured in Europe, I remember playing in Vienna with the Trans-Siberian Orchestra on the evening of Beethoven's passing, or the anniversary of his passing in Vienna.
Wow.
Whoa.
This is going to go one of two ways real quick.
Right.
Prepare.
And a standing ovation like I'd never seen at the end.
Oh, wow.
That's awesome.
Because, people want to hear those themes, interpreted and brought into yet another story, breathe new life into these amazing pieces of music. And the Europeans, they don't play. They take that stuff serious.
Yeah. And that's pretty cool too, because they were pioneers too. Beethoven and Haydn, all those guys. They were looking for new things. And I think it's kind of cool how you guys are kind of carrying the torch, so to speak, where you're paying respect, giving them their props. But then it's like, okay, let's do, maybe this is what they sort of a thing that they would have done, and really make it into a newer creation. I think that's a really cool way of quilting.
Well, at least saying, what would Beethoven have been like with a Les Paul and a Marshall?
Oh, exactly.
Right,
I mean, his pianos were like just beat up to a pulp. Yeah.
Yes.
But I just know that I learned a whole new respect for the great works because, again, growing up a kid on Long Island, Motown, the Beatles, the Stones. A massive Southern rock fan. I mean, those were my first guitar heroes: the Allman Skinner, Charlie Daniels, Marshall Tucker.
Right.
Then like Leslie Westwood Mountain, Johnny Winter, Rick Derringer. I mean, you just thought about these guys were crushing.
Yeah.
And what I was like when I learned the solo to Ramblin' Man, I was like, I got this down. Until I heard Van Halen in '78 for the first time. And then digging into the TSO. Working on these records, digging in with Paul, deciphering some of Beethoven's symphonies, and again, going back to the mathematical modal theory nerd that I am, I was like, this is deep on a whole different level. I wouldn't have known this harmony, these reharmonizations, like the cadences, just the way that and it fits seamlessly. And the melodies it just blew my mind,
Wow.
So I learned a lot by doing these last bunch of records with the band. I mean, for 25 years, every time I sit down and Paul would throw another idea, I'm like, oh no, not Beethoven again. Can't we just play Melissa or Jessica?
Right.
Oh, wow.
So, pentatonic scale for once, please, guy. But nope. Pushing the envelope made me a better player, made me a much better musician, made me a pretty good band leader because now I understand, the mechanics of those works too. And I'm like, wow, incredible.
That is.
So speaking of touring, is there just one group, or do you have a couple different groups that travel? Well, I know the COVID situation probably has had a huge impact on your touring, but so are there just one group, or do you still have the two? How's that working out?
Well, basically, yes and no.
Okay.
So what happened was we started recording in 95, 96, 97, 98. You know, we had done 2 Christmas records. It was Christmas Eve and Other Stories and The Christmas Attic. And then we worked on that record, Beethoven's Last Night, which was going to be Paul's first non-holiday rock opera.
Okay.
And basically, you know, for what it's worth, we were like the Steely Dan. You know, like we were just making records, selling millions of them, but never toured, because how could you ever possibly tour with 7 or 8 different lead singers, you know, representing the different characters in these stories,
Right.
you know, with an orchestra. I mean, the first time we had a children's choir, you know, I'm not getting on an 8-year-old's do that. It's not. So in 99, is a gentleman, Bill Lewis at NCX in Cleveland, Ohio. The radio station was just crushing airplay, and like Cleveland was like over the top, you know, playing TSO material, as was the rest of the country. But this guy turned around and said, "I bet you guys couldn't come to Cleveland and do a show. And that's all you had to do was dare my boss, Paul." So he, you know, he kind of says, "Okay, we're going to tour," and I'm like, "Huh? How are we going to do this?" He's like, "We'll figure it out. You know, adapt, overcome, and improvise." You know, and he taught me that years ago, and to this day, that stayed with me. You know, we had a narrator like reciting the poetry in between the songs. We were writing on the fly, this underscoring for the narrations, going through this this rock opera of a story. You know, and like every singer that we knew in New York City said, "Hey, dude, you busy in December?" You know. We found, you know, like violin players, cello players, just like, you know, and all of us jammed onto 2 buses in 1 truck. And we had like 7 cities on that tour. It was like Philly, Cleveland, Chicago, Detroit, New York, Boston, something like that.
Yeah.
And we sold out a bunch of theaters. Like, dude, this is awesome.
Wow.
That was so much fun. Thanks, you know, for a great run. And it was literally that innocent, that simple, because there was no expectations. It had never been done before. So we just had a theater tour. We never played a club. We were never an opening band. We never had an opening band. It was just, dude, I tell you what, the first show at the Tower Theater in Philadelphia, I'll never forget this, like it was yesterday. Okay, 1995, they said, 1999, they said sold out. I'm like, but who bought tickets to this? You know, who's buying all these records? Who's coming? Do they know who? Everybody thought we were from Russia. Okay. So the house lights go down, the curtain comes up, and like the fog that was rolling out of one fog machine off the side of the stage kind of parted. And in front of me was like this really attractive, like, I don't know, late 60s, early 70s year old couple, like somebody's grandma and grandpa with those crocheted reindeer sweaters that people wear around the holidays. It's like, oh, that's cute. And next to them was a dude in a Slayer hoodie.
Very diverse.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fun for the whole family.
But we're dead. Put my head down, played, standing ovation. It was awesome. It was so much fun.
Amazing.
All those shows, man, it was so crazy. The next year in 2000, they said, we're going to go tour again, but we have an issue. And I was like, what? They said, well, we got, you know, the 13 colonies, you know, we're doing pretty good. But then they want shows in like, you know, Seattle, Dallas, LA, Phoenix.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, how are we getting the band out that way? Paul said, funny you should ask that. You're taking Johnny Lee, the bass player, and a couple of the singers, and you're going to put a whole band together around you guys, and the other 2 guys are going to go find the rest of the members for another band, and we're going to have to like cut in half.
Nice.
Right.
You know, until November, December, because we physically cannot like hit the whole country.
Right.
Sure.
You know. Now that was the first, and again, you adapt, you overcome, and you improvise, right? So we all rehearse in one building, and then it's like, all right, see you all after New Year's.
Oh, wow.
Then,
Yeah.
years into that, they're like, no, we need another band, or you guys have to start doing afternoon shows, because in Colorado Springs and Salt Lake City, they sold 14,000 tickets in about 11 minutes.
Oh, my.
And I said, what are we going to do? So we got to do a show at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm like, excuse me? We're going to do a rock show with lasers and pyro at 3 in the afternoon?
Right.
Have a little bite to eat and then do it again at 8? Really? Really?
Yeah.
Nice.
That's how this thing's grown up over the last, 21 years of touring, with the exception of this disastrous pandemic.
Yeah.
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 Put the brakes on us for 1 year. But
Yeah.
if that's a small problem compared to the amount of pain and anguish and the things that are going on with the families globally now.
Sure.
So again,
Sure.
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
bigger picture,
Right.
and we'll figure something else out.
Right. So
Yeah.
because of all that, where's the best place for our listeners to find the music of Trans-Siberian Orchestra, so they can really get a
Well, I mean, first and foremost, you could always go to trans-siberian.com. I mean, I'm old, so I don't kind of like go on the internet all that much, but it's a pretty good website. You can find out all about the band. There's a discography. You can link to, click on certain links. You can go to, I don't even know where you buy music these days. I was going to say go to the record store, but that's an antiquated idea. But there's a lot of YouTube videos out from the shows.
Okay.
And, there's a lot that you can kind of research. I mean, a lot of people have embraced us very dearly as part of their holiday tradition.
Right.
Yeah.
Even past the holidays, we've had great success touring and bringing these works, out to the masses, like you said, especially by the great composers. But I got to tell you guys, and I love what you're doing, especially when it comes to kids and music education, because the most important, the hidden treasure in my job is, again, I'm downstage center. Okay, with my Les Paul around my neck, and I'm looking out, there's 15, 16, 17,000 people, whatever it is, and that's all cool. But every so often I'll look down and I'll see a 4 or 5-year-old child, boy or girl, and I'll kind of see that little glimmer of light go off.
Right.
And I can't tell you how many times that they'll come down the autograph line after the show and say, I want to start taking guitar lessons, or I want to start taking violin lessons, or I want to sing, or whatever it is. And that, to me, is the greatest gift of them all, because maybe it nudged some young kid just in a different trajectory enough to at least give them the opportunity to put this thing on their lap, as opposed to a laptop or a phone.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
And then every so often, I'd say 3 or 4 times in the last 25 years, one of those children that came down the line 12 years later ends up auditioning for the band.
Wow.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Actually hired a couple of them over the years, to where I remember distinctly, 10 years old, this young kid, Andrew Goymer. He's based out of Sacramento area, California. Got me on the autograph line, asked me to sign his guitar, and he goes, one day I want to be in a band with you. I'm like, hey, dude, just practice, And he found me on Facebook, and he'd send me messages, and I'll talk. That's fine. He's in the backup band now, and he's like 24 years old. He just worked and worked and worked. And so to me, to influence another generation of children, to expose them to Beethoven and Chopin and Grieg and Liszt, and just like things that they normally wouldn't listen to, or maybe Motown, or maybe acoustic works, or maybe just the fact that they were like watching a rock opera. Paul O'Neill's work has just handed another generation, check this out.
Yeah.
Right.
And for me, like my daughters, my older sons kind of grew up with the band. My daughters, they don't know anything different, So Olivia, who's 9 years old, has been coming to see the show since she's 3 years old. She's singing, she's dancing, she's got her own little pink Stratocaster now. My little daughter Layla just thinks, you go to concerts, you have a laminate, you go to catering, and you watch every night, So my children is one thing, but to look out in the audience and see 3 or 4 generations of family members sitting together, and younger ones are saying, hey, Grandpa, can I have a guitar?
Yeah.
That's a true blessing in my job.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's something that we hope that with this show, we get to talk to people like you in hopes that they, check out the Trans-Siberian Orchestra. Maybe they never would have before. And so that's definitely something that we hope to do, and we'll definitely put the links in the description, in show notes and all of that. Yeah, so that we can, because we want people to listen to you guys. I mean, it's just amazing. So
I was thank you so much, because there's so much depth musically, and it's not not funny, but one of the most interesting things about the band is that a 10-year-old may go, this is so cool, but his mom or her mom, dad, the grandparents will also find something on the records that they love, that they're familiar with.
Right.
So everybody's learning something new about somebody else's generation of music.
yes,
Everybody's grandparents, maybe they like we do a Leon Russell-esque type, stride piano thing on one song. And, like maybe the older family members like, it's kind of cool.
Yep.
Yeah. And the kids, but hey, you're right. But then like listen to like this crazy guitar, this violin, whatever. To everybody, and we get to teach each other things that you don't know. And that's the beauty of music. It really doesn't know any boundaries if given the opportunity.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't want all these radio formats and like okay, here's the hip hop station, here's the street hip hop station, here's the rock station, here's classic rock, here's 60s. It's just like stop already.
Mm-hmm.
Give me one good music station.
Yes.
Right.
I mean, you guys know, there's only 12 notes in music, right? That's it.
Right.
You have a finite amount of ingredients with an infinite amount of combinations. So the fact that Beethoven and Led Zeppelin use the same exact notes, come on.
Yeah.
Why paint yourself into a corner from the jump, man? Just listen to the things that you normally wouldn't listen to.
Yeah.
That's great.
That's awesome. Well, Al Pitrelli, amazing guitarist of the Trans-Siberian Orchestra. Thanks so much for being on the show, and we wish you all the best.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. I enjoyed our conversation a lot, guys.
Yeah.
Most importantly, stay safe. All right,
Yes.
Stay healthy, safe. Much love. Have a great holiday season. Hope to see you soon.